8 months pregnant, she went to the hospital for the ultrasound, but caught her husband holding hands with his pregnant mistress, and what the doctor revealed next destroyed his world. The steady beep of the ultrasound machine was the soundtrack to Emily's joy. At 8 months pregnant, every hospital visit reminded her that the life she carried was almost ready for the world. The doctor smiled, pointing to the pulsing speck on the screen. "Your boy's strong, Emily. Lungs perfect, heart beating like a drum." She smiled back, a glow lighting her tired but radiant face. Her hand rested instinctively on her belly, a gesture of protection and endless love. In that moment, nothing else mattered. She and her son, a perfect unit. Leaving the exam room, clutching the ultrasound prints like a trophy, she texted her husband, Jack. "Our champ's doing great. Can't wait to show you. Love you." His reply didn't come, but she brushed it off. He was probably swamped at work, closing another big deal that had consumed him lately. She walked through the sterile white hallway of Seattle Grace Hospital, feeling a peace she hadn't in weeks. The anxiety, the sleepless nights, all faded before the certainty that her baby was healthy. Then, turning into the main corridor toward the exit, her world stopped spinning and shattered into a million pieces. There he was, Jack, not with a client, not in a meeting. He was there in the same hospital, but his focus wasn't on her. He held another woman's hand, a tall, slim blonde whose face was twisted in pain and worry, and the detail that stole the air from Emily's lungs was the woman's prominent belly, nearly as large as hers. The air vanished, her legs buckled. The ultrasound prints hit the floor with a dry snap, and she couldn't bend to pick them up. If anyone ever doubted your strength, subscribe. Because sometimes a woman's courage alone is what the world needs to see. The scene felt like a surreal nightmare. Jack, the man she'd built a life with, the father of the child she carried, was there, comforting another pregnant woman. For a moment, Emily's mind scrambled for a logical explanation. A sister? A cousin? A co-worker in distress? But the way he looked at her, the intimacy in his touch, the way he whispered comfort in her ear, crushed any hope of a misunderstanding. That was the look he used to give her. That was the hand meant to hold hers. Emily's blood froze, then boiled, a wave of nausea and fury rising in her throat. She took a step forward, then another, her heels echoing in the silence that had formed in her head. "Jack," she called, her voice a trembling thread she barely recognized. He turned, and the panic flooding his face was the final confirmation. His eyes widened, color drained from his cheeks. He looked like a trapped animal, glancing from her to the other woman, unsure where to flee. The mistress, meanwhile, showed no surprise. Instead, a glint of challenge and triumph flashed in her eyes. She clung tighter to Jack's arm, claiming ownership. "Who's this?" the blonde demanded, her voice loud and shrill, drawing stares from nurses and passing patients. Humiliation began to settle, a hot red stain creeping up Emily's neck. She was the wife. She carried the legitimate heir. Yet here she was, treated like an intruder. "Emily, I can explain," Jack stammered, dropping the woman's arm as if it burned, but it was too late. The mistress stepped forward, planting herself between Emily and Jack, a human barrier of defiance. "Explain what, honey?" she said, her tone sickly sweet as she glanced at Jack, then turned to Emily with a sneer. "That I'm pregnant with his kid too? That our baby needs care now? I'm having contractions, sweetie. So if you don't mind, get out of the way." The word sweetie dripped with contempt, slicing the air. Every curious glance in the corridor felt like a knife in Emily's skin. She looked at Jack, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, to deny it, to defend her. But he stood silent, paralyzed by guilt and cowardice. His silence was the loudest, most painful answer of all. The mistress, sensing victory, pressed harder. "Attention! I need priority care," she shouted to the receptionist, who gaped at the scene. "The father of my baby's here, and his wife's causing a scene. This can't wait." All eyes in the corridor. A nurse whispered. Another looked away. Emily was just the wife now, and no one moved to help her. She felt a sharp pang in her belly, a spasm of pain that wasn't physical but emotional, so deep it seemed to tear her apart. The world spun, voices fading to a distant buzz. She watched in slow motion as Jack hesitated for a second, his gaze torn between duty and panic, before finally making his choice. He turned his back on Emily and followed the mistress toward the reception desk, leaving his 8-month pregnant wife alone in the corridor. Ultrasound prints scattered at her feet. The hospital corridor, once a place of peace and anticipation, became a stage for her humiliation. Every face that turned to stare, every whisper that died when she met their eyes was another nail in her emotional coffin. Emily stood frozen, her body petrified, as she watched Jack's silhouette vanish with the other woman's, swallowed by the bureaucracy of the reception area. He didn't look back, not once. That simple omission was crueler than any shout or accusation. It meant, in that moment, she had become invisible to him. The man who vowed to love and protect her in sickness and in health was abandoning her in the very place symbolizing their union, the site where their child's health was monitored. The ultrasound prints on the floor seemed to mock her, small squares of thermal paper showing a future just stolen. With an effort that drained her remaining energy, Emily crouched, the weight of her belly making the movement slow and painful. Her hands trembled as she gathered each print, fingers brushing the cold, impersonal floor. An older nurse with a kind, weathered face approached silently and helped retrieve the last image, which had slid under a chair. "You okay, hun?" the woman asked, her voice low and full of unexpected compassion. Emily just shook her head, unable to form words. The tears she'd held back so fiercely finally broke through, streaming hot and silent down her face. The nurse guided her to an empty chair, away from the most direct stares, and handed her a cup of water. "Breathe deep. Think of the baby," she advised. The mention of the baby was an anchor in the storm. Yes, the baby. He was real. He needed her. That simple, powerful truth kept her from collapsing entirely. As she tried to steady her breathing, Emily's mind rewound the past months, searching for signs, clues she'd ignored, Jack's last-minute business trips. The nights he came home late, smelling of bourbon from bars they didn't frequent, the subtle distance that had crept between them, a chasm she'd chalked up to his work stress and her own pregnancy anxiety. She remembered one night, about 2 months ago, waking at 3 a.m. to an empty bed. She found him in the living room, sitting in the dark, only his phone's glow lighting his tense face. When she asked what was wrong, he muttered, "Work worries," and sent her back to bed, saying she needed rest. She obeyed, trusting him, believing the facade he'd built so carefully. How foolish she'd been. Every lie, every excuse, now fit into a grotesque puzzle. The Mistress, as the woman had called herself, wasn't a recent mistake. That belly, nearly as big as hers, was proof of a long, calculated parallel betrayal. He hadn't just cheated, he'd built another life, a mirrored one, with another woman. Nausea surged again. It wasn't just a broken heart, it was the sense of living a lie, sharing her deepest dreams with a stranger. The image of him holding the other woman's hand, whispering in her ear, burned into her mind. It was an intimacy he hadn't shown her in months. Anger began to replace pain, a cold, sharp fury giving her unexpected clarity. She stood, nodded thanks to the nurse, and walked back to the reception area, not to confront, not to scream, but to observe. She needed to see how far Jack's cowardice would go. Hidden behind a pillar, she watched the scene unfold. The Mistress, whose name she overheard as Lauren, sat in a wheelchair, performing dramatic fragility. Jack stood beside her, running a hand through her hair, his face a mask of forced concern. He filled out forms, spoke to nurses with an urgency he rarely used for Emily's needs. He was the devoted husband, the worried father, but for the wrong woman. Humiliation burned, but now it was different. It was fuel. Emily memorized every gesture, every exchanged word, the dynamic between them. Lauren was the aggressor, the drama queen, while Jack was the passive pawn, clearly terrified but choosing the path of least immediate resistance. He saw her. For a second, his eyes met hers over Lauren's shoulder. There was a silent plea in his gaze, a desperate bid for understanding that was so outrageous, Emily almost laughed. Understanding. He wanted understanding while his pregnant wife watched the theater of his double life. She held his gaze, letting him see not pain, but the ice forming in her eyes. She didn't look away until he, uncomfortable and guilty, did first. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. She was no longer the paralyzed victim. She was the witness. A nurse called Lauren's name, and Jack pushed the wheelchair down a corridor toward the maternity ward. The same ward where Emily had her appointments. The same ward where she planned to deliver her son. The irony was so cruel it bordered on absurd. Left alone again, Emily felt a sharp, real pang low in her abdomen. This time it wasn't emotional, it was physical. A strong cramp that made her gasp and brace against the wall. Another followed, more intense. The stress, the shock, the adrenaline of rage. It was all taking its toll. She looked at her hands and saw them shaking uncontrollably. Panic bubbled again, but this time it was different. Not about the betrayal, about her son. She was going into labor, alone in the middle of the hospital where her husband had abandoned her for another woman. The contraction hit so hard she bit her lip until she tasted blood. No hand to hold, no breathe to hear. Just her and the pain. The man who should have been by her side was perhaps mere yards away, in the next room, comforting the woman who'd destroyed their lives. Pain struck again, stronger, stealing her breath. She dragged herself to the reception desk, the same one where Lauren had put on her show minutes earlier. I think I'm in labor, she managed, her voice weak. The receptionist, the same one who'd witnessed her humiliation, now looked at her with a mix of pity and professionalism. Within minutes, Emily was in a wheelchair, wheeled in the opposite direction from where Jack had gone. A new fear gripped her, the fear of giving birth alone, the fear of her son entering a world already broken. As she was wheeled away, she grabbed her phone. Her fingers hovered over Jack's name. For a second, instinct, years of partnership, nearly made her call. But then the image of him turning his back flooded back. She deleted his name and dialed another, one she hadn't called in months. "Mike," she said, when the calm male voice answered. "It's me, Emily. I need you." The voice on the other end was an island of calm in her ocean of chaos. "Emily, what happened? You okay?" Mike, her old co-worker, the only one who'd treated her with respect beyond professional courtesy. He'd left the company nearly a year ago, but the friendship, though distant, endured. He was Jack's opposite. Thoughtful, observant, a man whose strength came not from arrogance but quiet integrity. "I'm at the hospital." "The baby, he's coming," she gasped between contractions, pain shortening her words. There was no hesitation in his reply. "Which hospital?" "I'm on my way." She gave the address, and the call ended. The simple certainty that someone was coming for her, someone not Jack, was a balm for her wounded soul. It wasn't about romance or replacement. It was about humanity, about not being utterly alone in her most vulnerable moment. Nurses settled her into a labor room, a space meant to be filled with a couple's joyful anticipation. Instead, the white walls echoed her solitude. Every procedure, every question about her medical history was a stab. "Where's the dad?" asked a young, well-meaning nurse, adjusting the fetal monitor on her belly. Emily swallowed hard, the knot in her throat nearly choking her. "He couldn't make it," she lied, the excuse sounding weak even to her. Shame was a constant companion, sitting in the room's corner watching her. She wondered where Jack was at that exact moment. Was he in the next room, holding Lauren's hand, whispering the same encouragement he'd promised her? The torture of that thought was almost worse than the physical pain of contractions, which grew in frequency and intensity. The sound of her son's heartbeat, amplified by the monitor, was her only comfort, a steady, strong rhythm reminding her what she was fighting for. Time dragged. Every minute was an eternity of pain and loneliness. She closed her eyes and saw Jack's face, not the loving one from her memories, but the pale, cowardly one that stared at her in the corridor. She saw Lauren's triumphant smirk, humiliation, betrayal, pain. It all mixed into a toxic cocktail, threatening to consume her. She tried to focus on the breathing techniques from their childbirth classes she'd attended with Jack, where they laughed and made plans. The memory was so painful she pushed it away. Those memories no longer belonged to her. They belonged to a life revealed as a lie. At some point, between one wave of pain and the next, the door opened. It wasn't Jack. It was Mike. He entered hesitantly, his face a mix of deep concern and respect for her space. He brought no flowers or balloons, just a bottle of water with ice and a solid, reassuring presence. "I got here as fast as I could," he said, his voice low. "How you holding up?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes, this time not from pain or anger, but overwhelming relief. The simple presence of a friendly face broke her composure's dam. "He's here, Mike," she whispered. "With another woman. Pregnant." Mike showed no shock. He just nodded slowly, his dark eyes full of an understanding that said he'd never trusted Jack. He pulled a chair close to the bed, sitting without a word. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer empty advice or pity. He just stayed, present. His silent presence was exactly what Emily needed. Not a substitute for her husband, but a guardian of her dignity. When the next contraction hit, a violent spasm arching her back, she instinctively reached out. Mike took her hand without hesitation, his large, steady grip enveloping hers. He let her squeeze with all her strength, absorbing her pain without complaint. In that handhold, there was more support and loyalty than she'd received from Jack in months. Meanwhile, in a room not far away, Jack lived his own private hell. Lauren wasn't in labor. It was Braxton Hicks' contractions, the false alarm the doctor explained with weary patience. But Lauren refused to accept it. She insisted something was wrong, demanding tests, attention, keeping Jack trapped by her side with a web of manipulation and drama. "You're not leaving me alone, are you, love?" she said, her eyes brimming with crocodile tears. "Not after what your wife did. She stressed me out. This could hurt our baby." Jack felt suffocated. Guilt over Emily gnawed at him, an ulcer burning in his stomach. The image of her in the corridor, the shock and pain in her eyes, the way the ultrasound prints fell to the floor, it would haunt him forever. He tried to leave Lauren's room, saying he needed to find Emily, but Lauren grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "If you walk out that door, I'll tell everyone in this hospital what you did. I'll go to your firm." "I'll ruin you," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. The victim mask had fallen, revealing the predator beneath, and Jack, weak and cornered by his own bad choices, gave in. He stayed. He chose the louder threat, the immediate problem, abandoning Emily's real, silent crisis. He sat by Lauren's bed, responding in monosyllables to her complaints, his phone in hand. He saw missed calls from his mom, his father-in-law. The outside world was starting to notice his absence, but fear paralyzed him. He'd created a monster, and now that monster held him on a leash. Lauren's temporary victory was absolute. She had the man, the attention, the control. She'd isolated him from his real life, making him a prisoner in her fabricated drama. Back in Emily's room, labor progressed relentlessly. Mike stayed by her side, a silent pillar. He dampened her lips with a cloth, whispered encouragement, and most importantly, witnessed her strength. He saw the woman he'd always admired from afar fight the battle of her life with courage that left him in awe. There were no more tears on Emily's face. Pain had purified her, burning away everything but determination. She was no longer giving birth to Jack's son. She was giving birth to her son. With each contraction, she detached a bit more from the man who betrayed her and clung tighter to the mother she was becoming. When the doctor announced it was time to push, a new energy filled her. It was the final stretch. Mike gripped her hand tighter, his eyes locked on hers. "You've got this, Emily. You're the strongest woman I know," he said, and she believed him. With a cry that was part pain, part rage, part liberation, she brought her son into the world. The baby's sharp cry filled the room and everything else faded. The doctor placed the warm, slippery little body on her chest, and as Emily looked at her son's face, the outside world vanished. No betrayal, no hospital, no loneliness, just her and him, a new beginning, a lifetime of unconditional love in her arms. Lauren's victory, in her quiet, babyless room, suddenly seemed what it truly was, empty and meaningless. The first hours with her son, whom she named Noah, were a blur of pure emotion and exhaustion. The world shrank to the small hospital room, the scent of a newborn, the warmth of his tiny body against hers. Mike left discreetly soon after the birth, promising to return the next day and giving her space to bond with the baby. Jack's absence was a done deal, a wound that still throbbed, but was covered by the protective layer of maternal love. Emily didn't cry anymore. The energy once spent on pain and humiliation was now focused entirely on Noah. She nursed him, changed his first diaper, and simply watched him sleep, marveling at the perfection of his tiny fingers and the way his mouth moved in silent dreams. He was living proof that something good and true had emerged from the ruins of her marriage. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, promising not just a new day on the calendar, but in her life. That's when the door opened, and a hesitant figure appeared. It was Jack. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, his usually impeccable hair disheveled. He held a bouquet of roses that seemed pathetically inadequate for the situation's gravity. His gaze fell on the bassinet beside Emily's bed, then to her face. There was a mix of relief, guilt, and desperate fear in his eyes. "Emily, I heard the baby was born. I'm so sorry," he began, his voice hoarse. Emily watched him in silence, her heart beating steadily. Seeing him didn't spark the explosion of rage she expected. Instead, she felt a cold distance, as if observing a stranger she'd once known well. "Sorry for what, Jack?" she asked, her voice calm and even, disarming him more than any scream. "For abandoning me while I went into labor? Or for living a double life behind my back?" He flinched at her directness. "I know. I have no excuses. I panicked. Lauren, she manipulated me, threatened me." The excuse was so weak, so self-centered, Emily felt a wave of contempt. He wasn't there to truly apologize. He was there to manage damage, to try to save himself. "Where is she now?" Emily asked, her tone still dangerously calm. "She was discharged this morning. It was nothing." "False alarm," he said, as if that absolved him. The irony was crushing. While he was manipulated by a false alarm, she endured the real transformative ordeal of childbirth alone. "So you did your duty to her and now you're here to do it for me? Like I'm just another item on your problem list?" she countered. Before Jack could respond, the door opened again. This time it was Dr. Harrison, the head of obstetrics, a middle-aged man with a serious professional air. He didn't smile. His gaze moved from Emily to Jack, and he cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, may I have a word? It's a rather delicate matter." The formality and gravity in his tone immediately put them on alert. Jack, clearly thinking the issue was about Emily or Noah, stepped forward. "Is something wrong with the baby?" "My wife?" The words "my wife" sounded hollow and false. Dr. Harrison ignored Jack's question and addressed them both. "Actually, the matter concerns an incident yesterday. It involves you, your wife, and another patient, Ms. Lauren Brooks." Lauren's name hung in the air like a toxin. Jack paled visibly. "Due to the unusual situation, and Ms. Brooks's public claim that you were the father of her expected child, and considering the stress caused to your wife, our patient, the hospital has a protocol. We conducted a paternity verification. It's standard procedure in cases of disputes or uncertainties occurring on our premises to ensure accuracy of records and the well-being of all involved." Jack looked confused. "Verification? But how?" The doctor continued, unfazed. "Ms. Brooks was admitted complaining of contractions, and during exams a blood sample was collected. You're also a registered companion in the hospital system, and your data, including blood type, are on file from prior visits with your wife. Preliminary blood compatibility analysis is a quick procedure." Dr. Harrison paused, looking directly at Jack, whose face was now a mask of growing panic. The world seemed to slow. Emily held her breath, unsure what to expect. She'd assumed Jack's paternity of Lauren's baby was fact. The twist that followed was something she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams of justice. "The results are conclusive," the doctor declared, his tone factual and emotionless. "Based on the blood type incompatibility between you and the fetus, it is medically impossible for you to be the biological father of Ms. Brooks's baby." The silence that followed was absolute, dense, and heavy. Jack's mouth fell open, the bouquet of roses slipping from his hand and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Impossible. No, it can't be. She swore. He stammered, staring at the doctor as if he'd spoken another language. The truth hit him like a freight train. He hadn't just been a traitor, he'd been a fool, a complete and utter idiot. Lauren hadn't just lied about her love or loyalty, she'd lied about the very premise of their affair. The child, the ultimate weapon she'd used to manipulate and trap him, was never his. Emily felt a laugh bubble in her chest, part shock, part relief, part dark, undeniable satisfaction. The poetic justice was so perfect, so devastating, it was almost comical. Jack had destroyed his family for a lie. He'd humiliated her publicly for a child that wasn't his. He'd abandoned her during the birth of his real son to comfort a woman using him in the most fundamental way. Lauren's false victory didn't just crumble, it exploded, taking the entire structure of Jack's betrayal with it. He wasn't a tragic villain torn between two loves. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. And in the midst of it all, the truth, cold, clinical, undeniable, had been delivered not by a private investigator or a tearful confession, but by a simple hospital DNA test. Karma hadn't just knocked, it had kicked down the door with the force of scientific certainty. Dr. Harrison's revelation hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Jack remained frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief, slowly turning to horror. The logic of his betrayal, however twisted, collapsed. He wasn't a man torn between two families. He was the architect of his own ruin, duped by the same person he'd betrayed everything for. The sound he made was a low groan, the sound of a man watching the ground vanish beneath him. He looked at Emily, his eyes desperate for, what, absolution, sympathy? He found none. What he saw on her face was far more terrifying. Calm. A glacial calm that offered no safe harbor. Emily, for her part, felt a razor-sharp clarity. The pain of betrayal was still there, a deep ember in her chest, but the humiliation had been washed away by this wave of ironic truth. The woman who'd confronted her with such arrogance, who'd wielded her pregnancy like a weapon, was a fraud. And Jack, the man she'd once loved, was the fool who'd fallen for her trap. I need to talk to her, Jack stammered, turning instinctively toward the door as if he could somehow confront the lie and undo it. But Emily spoke, her voice ringing clear and loud in the room's silence. No, you're not going anywhere. He stopped, turning to face her. The authority in her voice was new, forged in the fire of pain and solitude over the past 24 hours. You're staying here. You owe me that. Dr. Harrison, sensing his role was done, and the brewing storm was strictly personal, nodded professionally. Congratulations again on the baby, Mrs. Carter. If you need anything, call the nurse. With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving them alone with the wreckage of their marriage. The roses on the floor. Dead. Jack sank into a chair, the same one Mike had occupied, and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. Emily, I swear I didn't know. She told me, she made me believe. His voice was a broken murmur, the sound of self-pity. Emily watched him without a drop of pity. Does it matter, Jack? Does it matter if you were a traitor or a stupid traitor? The result for me is the same. You broke me. You humiliated me in front of strangers. You left me to give birth to our son alone. Each word was a stone, thrown with precision. She wasn't shouting. The coldness of her delivery was far more devastating. I was here in pain, scared, and the only thing I could think was that the man who promised to protect me was in another room, holding the hand of the woman who stabbed me in the back, and all for a lie. You traded your real son for a fake one. The weight of that final sentence seemed to crush him. He lifted his head, his face wet with tears. Please, Emily, please. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I love you. I love our son. We can fix this. I'll do anything. That's when the door opened again. This time it was Mike. He carried 2 paper bags, one with real food, not hospital fare, and another with baby essentials he figured Emily might need. He paused at the door, taking in the scene. Emily in bed, strong and regal in her pain. Jack, a broken man crying in a chair, and the trampled roses on the floor. "Sorry, am I interrupting?" he asked, his tone polite, but his eyes fixed on Emily, silently asking if she wanted him to leave. Emily looked at Mike, then back at Jack, and then she made her choice. "No, Mike, you're not interrupting. Actually, you're right on time. Please, come in." Mike entered, setting the bags on a table. He gave Jack a short, cold nod, a minimal acknowledgement of his existence. Mike's presence in the room, calm, helpful and loyal, was a stark contrast to Jack's emotional chaos. He was a mirror, reflecting everything Jack wasn't and hadn't been. Jack looked from Mike to Emily, realization dawning amid his panic. "What's he doing here?" he asked, a trace of his old arrogance and possessiveness surfacing. "He's here because I called him," Emily replied simply. "He was here last night. He held my hand while I gave birth to our son, Jack. He got me water. He told me I was strong. He did the job that was supposed to be yours." The confession hit Jack like a punch. The image of another man by his wife's side in such an intimate moment was a new layer of torture. You slept with him." The accusation was desperate, an attempt to shift blame, to make her as dirty as him. Emily laughed, a short, joyless sound. "God, Jack, you really don't get it, do you? Your mind's so warped you can't imagine a pure act of kindness. Friendship. No, I didn't sleep with him. He respected me. A word you seem to have forgotten the meaning of." She then turned to Jack, and the final act of her emotional vengeance began. She softened her expression, letting a trace of vulnerability show. She reached out toward him. "Jack, look at me." Confused but clinging to this thread of hope, he stood and approached the bed, taking her hand like a drowning man grasping debris. "I know you messed up," she said, her voice now soft, almost a whisper. "I know you were tricked, and part of me still loves the man I married." Jack's tears doubled, this time with relief. "Emily, oh Emily, I love you so much. We'll get through this, I promise." He leaned to kiss her, his face full of pathetic hope. And that's when she pulled her hand back at the last second. His kiss met air. His face collapsed, like someone had switched off the light inside him. "But that man," she continued, her voice cold as ice again, "died yesterday in that corridor. What's left is just a coward, and I don't raise my son in a coward's shadow." The shift was so swift, so brutal. Jack recoiled as if physically struck. The hope on his face disintegrated, replaced by the same disbelief as before, but now final, without appeal. "What?" he whispered. "It's over, Jack," she said, each word a final nail in the coffin. "I want a divorce, I want full custody of Noah, and I want you out of this room now." She looked at Mike, who watched silently. "Mike, can you help me pack my things? I think the doctor will discharge me soon." And I'm not going back to that house. The request wasn't just logistical, it was a declaration. She was choosing her future, and Jack wasn't in it. Emily's vengeance wasn't a screamed confrontation in the hospital corridor. It was a silent, methodical execution, carried out in the calm of her recovery room. She let him see the truth, let him confess, let him beg. She gave him a glimpse of the forgiveness he craved, only to rip it away when he believed it most. She didn't destroy him with anger. She dismantled him with dignity. Jack stood there, a broken man in a hospital room, having lost his wife, his son, and his mistress in under a day, all for a lie he was willing to believe. He'd fallen from grace, not in a public scandal, but in the silent, powerful act of a woman who decided she was worth more. Emily's order for him to leave hung in the air, final and irrevocable. Jack looked from her impassive face to Mike's, who was now moving with quiet purpose, organizing Emily's few belongings. The scene was one of a life being repacked, a life from which he was summarily excluded. There were no more pleas. The final defeat had emptied him of all fight. He was a hollow shell, haunted by the ghosts of his own choices. With one last glance at the bassinet where Noah slept, oblivious to the earthquake that had demolished his family before he even knew it, Jack turned and left. The click of the door closing behind him was the loudest sound Emily had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom, It was the sound of an ending. The moment he was gone, a wave of exhaustion hit her, so powerful she sank back into the pillows, closing her eyes. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation drained away, leaving raw pain and the reality of her new situation. She was a single mother. Her marriage was over. Her future, once a clear, well-paved path, was now uncharted territory. Mike stopped what he was doing and approached. "You sure?" he asked, his voice low, not questioning her decision, but offering a final chance to process it. Emily opened her eyes and looked at him. "I've never been sure of anything in my life," she said, and the firmness in her own voice surprised her. The woman who'd entered that hospital 24 hours earlier, happy and a bit naive, no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, harder, but also truer. As Mike helped with discharge preparations, Lauren's fate was being sealed elsewhere. After being discharged with a flimsy stress excuse, she tried calling Jack repeatedly. The calls went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. Her plan, so carefully constructed, was unraveling. The pregnancy, her insurance policy, her manipulation weapon had been the perfect bait for a guilty, wealthy man like Jack. The real father was a fleeting fling, a man with no resources or interest in responsibility, who vanished as soon as she told him about the baby. Jack was the target, the prize. The hospital scene had been a calculated act, designed to force his hand, to cement her position and permanently alienate him from his wife. She hadn't counted on the cold efficiency of a hospital protocol. Her fall began with a simple email notification. It was from the HR department of the marketing firm where she worked as a consultant, the same firm where Jack was a senior executive. The email was short and formal, informing her that her contract was terminated effective immediately, citing a morality clause prohibiting inappropriate relationships that could compromise company integrity. Someone had talked. Jack, in his spiral of despair and rage at being duped, had likely made one call, a petty act of revenge against the woman who'd made a fool of him. Suddenly, Lauren hadn't just lost her future sponsor, she'd lost her livelihood. The next humiliation was more public. Mutual friends who'd once listened sympathetically as she painted Emily as a cold, neglectful wife now looked at her with contempt. The story spread like wildfire. Not her version, but the truth. The affair, the fake pregnancy, the hospital confrontation. She was no longer the tragic victim. She was the exposed con artist. Emily's emotional justice, however, didn't come from witnessing Lauren's distant fall. It came from her own acts of recovery. Leaving the hospital was the first step. Mike drove her not to the house she'd shared with Jack, a place now haunted by lies, but to a comfortable hotel he'd booked, ensuring she and Noah had a neutral, safe sanctuary. He handled everything, from carrying bags to ensuring the room had a proper crib, acting with the quiet efficiency of someone who genuinely cared, expecting nothing in return. In the days that followed, Emily operated with focused determination. She hired the city's top divorce attorney. When Jack tried contacting her through emails and texts full of pleas and promises, she forwarded them to her lawyer, building an impenetrable barrier. She refused to be dragged back into his drama. Emily's triumph was built in small moments of reclaimed power. It was in how she learned to soothe Noah's cries in the middle of the night, alone. It was in the first time she took him for a walk in Seattle's Discovery Park, feeling the sun on her face and realizing happiness didn't depend on anyone else. It was in the conversation with her parents, where instead of presenting herself as a victim, she told the story with brutal honesty, taking control of her own narrative. She didn't hide the pain, but she didn't let it define her. Her strength wasn't in the absence of suffering, but in her refusal to be destroyed by it. Lauren's punishment, meanwhile, was a downward spiral. Without a job, and with her reputation in tatters, she found herself isolated. The pregnancy, meant to be her greatest advantage, became a financial and social burden. She ended up moving back to her parents' house in Portland, a defeated woman whose attempt to game life resulted in her own ruin. She didn't go to jail, didn't suffer physical violence. Her punishment was subtler and perhaps crueler. She was forced to live with the consequences of her own character, stripped of the admiration and status she craved. For Emily, the final justice wasn't about revenge but transcendence. About a month after Noah's birth, she sat in a Pike Place market cafe waiting for Mike for a friendly lunch. She was browsing apartment listings, planning her new beginning. She looked different. There was a new confidence in her posture, a clarity in her gaze. She was no longer the betrayed wife. She was Emily, Noah's mother, a woman rediscovering herself. When Jack walked into the cafe, it was by chance. He saw her before she saw him. He looked thinner, worn. He watched her for a moment, perhaps gathering courage to approach. But then Mike arrived. He smiled at Emily, handed her a small toy he'd bought for Noah, and sat across from her. Their conversation was easy, full of laughter and mutual respect. It wasn't a romance blooming, at least not yet. It was something deeper, a partnership built on integrity. Jack watched this scene for a moment, the scene of his old life continuing beautifully without him, with another man, a better man, occupying the space he'd abandoned. He didn't approach. He just turned and left the cafe, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd lost. It wasn't just a wife, it was an entire world. And that, for Emily, was the true emotional justice. Not his destruction, but the unshakable construction of herself. Time has a curious way of sanding the edges of pain, not to make it disappear, but so we can hold it without cutting ourselves. 6 months passed. Emily's life didn't become a fairy tale overnight. The rebuilding was slow, methodical, like assembling a mosaic from a shattered vase's pieces. There were days of overwhelming loneliness, nights when Noah's cries echoed her own sadness. But unlike before, the sadness wasn't a bottomless pit. It was just one color in the spectrum of her new life, a color that, by contrast, made joy even brighter. She found a charming apartment in a tree-lined Seattle neighborhood, a space that was hers and Noah's alone, every corner filled not with memories of a past life, but with promises of a future. Mike remained a constant. Their friendship deepened, evolving naturally into an affection neither felt the need to rush or label. He was there, not as a savior but as a partner, celebrating small victories and offering a shoulder on tough days. He fell for not the woman he'd rescued, but the woman who'd rescued herself. Jack, meanwhile, existed on the periphery of her life, a ghostly figure defined by alimony payments and lawyer-mediated communications. He tried at first to fight for shared custody, but his absence at Noah's birth and the circumstances of his affair were powerful weapons in Emily's attorney's hands. He was reduced to supervised visits, bittersweet, timed encounters with a son who regarded him with a baby's indifferent curiosity for a stranger. Jack's real punishment wasn't financial or legal. It was the emptiness. He had the luxury condo, the expensive car, the intact career, but returned to a silent home echoing with the ghost of the family he'd imploded for a mirage. The surprise, the true epilogue no one expected, didn't come from Emily, Jack, or Lauren. It came from an anonymous source, an envelope with no return address left at the reception of Emily's new freelance consulting office. Inside was no letter, just a USB drive. Intrigued and slightly wary, she plugged it into her laptop. The file was audio, a recording. The voice was Lauren's, but she wasn't talking to Jack. She was talking to another woman, laughing. "The idiot fell for it hook, line, and sinker," Lauren's voice said, full of amused venom. "I just had to cry a bit, say the baby was his and he was ready to ditch the perfect little wife. Men are so predictable. The plan was simple. Secure the baby, secure his money, and in a year or two, we'd ditch him and take it all." The other voice laughed along. "And the wife? You didn't feel bad?" Lauren's reply made Emily's blood run cold. "Bad? Honey, she wasn't collateral damage. She was the target. You don't get it. Jack was just the tool. The revenge was against her." The recording continued, and the truth, far darker and more complex than Emily had imagined, emerged. The other woman was the older sister of Emily's college ex-boyfriend, a guy Emily had left because he was abusive and controlling. Apparently, he never got over the breakup and spent years nursing a sick resentment. His sister and Lauren were childhood friends. The plan wasn't just about money. It was long-term revenge, orchestrated by proxy. They saw Emily's happy marriage, her perfect life, and decided to destroy it in the cruelest way, using her own husband's loyalty as a weapon against her. Jack wasn't the player. He was the chessboard. The betrayal wasn't an act of his weakness. It was an act of war against her. Emily stopped the recording, her hands trembling. The revelation didn't bring anger. It brought a strange, terrible peace. The story wasn't about a man's weakness or a woman's greed. It was about envy, a poison that rots from afar. And in the end, their plan failed. Yes, they broke her marriage, but they didn't break her. On the contrary, they freed her. They forced her to find a strength she didn't know she had. They inadvertently pushed her toward a more authentic life and a love based on respect, not possession. She deleted the file, didn't forward it to anyone, didn't use it as a weapon. Their revenge didn't deserve another second of her energy. Their justice had already been served by their own incompetence and malice. Emily's greatest victory wasn't exposing them, but realizing they were irrelevant. That night, with Noah sleeping peacefully in his crib and the city lights glowing outside, Mike arrived for dinner. He found her thoughtful, staring out the window. "Everything okay?" he asked. She turned and smiled, a genuine smile, free of shadows. "Everything's perfect," she said. She took his hand, lacing their fingers. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, uncertainty wasn't scary. It was a promise. The promise that the best parts of her story were yet to be written. She'd entered that hospital for a routine checkup and instead received a full diagnosis of her life. And the cure, she realized, wasn't forgetting the betrayal. It was understanding that some betrayals aren't about you. They're about the demons of those who betray you. And your only obligation is to step out of the fire's path and let them burn in their own flames. The truth always finds its way, but sometimes it doesn't come to punish. It comes to liberate. So, what did you think? On a scale of 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Leave your comments saying which city you're watching from and subscribe to follow our next stories. Thanks so much for joining us, and see you next time.